This week I sent out an email announcing tonight as Pride Shabbat. And I received from the community an array of responses. On one hand, I received responses, was I unaware that in 1992, Rabbi Harold Schulweis gave a groundbreaking sermon in this very synagogue, and my email doesn't acknowledge it. We've been a LGBTQ welcoming synagogue for a long, long time. One side of the equation. Other side, I received several emails telling me, how could we dare do this on Shabbat? We're desecrating the Shabbat here at Valley Beth Shalom. We have a wide array of support in the middle, but we live in between the poles. And I wanted to point that out because my talk is going to be about that tonight. Because when Harold Schulweis gave his sermon in the sanctuary in 1992, he prefaced it at the very beginning by talking about the idea that it was the Committee of Jewish Law and Standards was considering changing conservative Judaism standards on the laws of homosexuality. He talked about a woman that came into his office. He talked about this groundswell, and he talked about the political elections that were going on right then in 1992. I was 12 years old in 1991, and I experienced that groundswell because of a speech that I heard given in Los Angeles that I watched with all of my friends, but it was not Rabbi Harold Schulweis's speech. It was given by a gentleman by the name of Irvin Johnson in 1991, and that was my introduction to the topic of homosexuality. Blair and I had the same experience in our public high schools in Chicago. We both grew up in extraordinarily Jewish neighborhoods. We attended public schools where every single person was a Democrat. I didn't meet a person that was a Republican until much later in life. Everybody in Chicago are all Democrats. It just doesn't necessarily mean the same thing as here in Los Angeles. And we were told by health teachers in 1991 that this was an epidemic that would threaten our lives as we grew up and went to college and had significant others. And we should do our best to stay away from public bathrooms, and especially, this was the most complicated because I'll never forget it, to stay away from Wrigley Field in Boys Town, which was particularly hurtful because as a Cubs fan, there was no way that I wasn't going to Wrigley Field. The reason I bring up this topic is because here at VBS, there was an expression of incredible love and acceptance. But for an entire generation that was being raised all around the country, there were facts that were being disseminated in school under the guise of science in order for us to protect ourselves. I would argue some of the most hateful rhetoric that I was ever exposed to about the LGBTQ community was actually delivered to us in lectures that we then wrote down in our notebooks. And the reason why we have to do it on Shabbos, the reason why Pride Shabbat is so fitting, if you open your Sidurim to page 25, on page 25, the Mishnah teaches us, in the very last paragraph, Chayav Adam limashmesh begadav be'erev Shabbat im chashecha, that a person is required to examine the contents of his clothing to free of inappropriate items on the eve of Shabbat prior to dark. I have to admit that in context, what this means is that I should check my pockets for keys or my wallet or a pencil to make sure that I'm not carrying on Shabbat. But I would argue that it is a principle much greater. As we enter Shabbat, we should rid ourselves of prejudice. As we enter Shabbat, we should rid ourselves of the untruths that bind us. As we enter Shabbat, we should rid ourselves of all of the preconceived notions that we have of one another. To enter Shabbat, or a glimpse of the world to come, means that we enter wearing the glasses of Rabbi Harold Schulweis. It means that we enter with an expression of love and acceptance and devotion to a higher principle. As a Jewish people, we've never, ever stood united in any kind of long-term sense. We come out of Egypt and we immediately break down into tribes. Any conference, any gala, any birthday party you ever attend with Jewish people, there's so much conversation about seating and where we should sit with each other, not with each other, who we like, who we don't like. And I have to tell you that sometimes Shabbat is the only time when we can come together. We have to have a Pride Shabbat. We have to have a Pride Shabbat because Pride Tuesday means nothing. We have to have a Pride Shabbat because we have to stand in a holy place in front of items that say that man should not lay with another man. And we have to say that I am a good, devout Jew, and I simply don't believe that anymore. It can't mean what we think it means. It has to mean something else, for the Torah has to remain relevant. And so I struggle with it, not only as a Jew, not only as a thoughtful person, not only as a rabbi, but as a father, and somebody who's trying to raise the next generation of Jews to behave differently than the generations that came before us. The generations that got on train cars being transported to their deaths, and German Jews did not want to stand next to Polish Jews because they were better. These are the Jews we do not want to be like. We need to embody a new spirit of acceptance within the Jewish people. We need to embody a new spirit of love on Shabbat. I came out to Los Angeles and I worked alongside many, many members of the LGBTQ community who were also members of the Jewish community who expressed to me their pain in walking into a synagogue. I went to rabbinical school and sat next to gay and lesbian rabbinical students who talked about their pain on Yom Kippur reading those passages. And then I went to Claremont to get my PhD and sat next to scholars of all faiths who wrote papers on Joseph being gay because he runs away from any attempt to have sex with a woman. If you read the text closely, you'll see what they're saying. They talk about David being gay because it says that David loved Jonathan more than the love he got from women. They wrote all these papers, and I looked at them quizzically when I began, and after spending time with my classmates, I realized they yearned to see themselves in the text of the Tanakh. And I don't think there's a greater compliment to the Jewish people than the idea that people want to see their own reflection in our holiest sanctified texts. And I think that if someone calls out and says, I'd like to come to synagogue, and I'd like to see my reflection in the waters of the streams of the Jewish people, of the story from whence we've come, in our family album, then we should open our arms and welcome them. And we should do it on the holiest evening of the week, when it means the most. And we should say it loudly and unabashedly. And I don't know if people in this room have sent me those emails, and I don't know if people outside of the room sent me those emails. But I love them too. and I understand their pain. Because I came from a place where I was far less understanding than I am today. I came from a Midwestern culture that I didn't think anybody in our class growing up was gay, and I was foolish. And there are moments of awakening when we all have to mature and open our eyes. And we have to realize, like Rabbi Schulweis instructed us, that we have members of our own community who want to come home. And at every point, whenever a Jew anywhere says, I want to come home, we should respond, welcome home, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.